The Diplomat program gives you the tools and context to navigate across borders. The program breaks down what it means to be a global citizen and why international relations is important. Today, 26th January, is Australia Day, a day which allows Australians to reflect on their development. As Australians celebrate their day, we also reflect on the relationship between Kenya and Australia. And we have the Australian High Commissioner to Kenya, Luke Williams, in studio to help us understand the bilateral relations between Kenya and Australia. My name is Geoffrey Onditi. That's a snippet of the Australia national anthem sung by the legendary Julie Anthony, today being Australia Day. Welcome, Luke Williams, to KBC, and welcome to the KBC English service.
Thank you very much for welcoming and inviting me onto your program.
Luke Williams, when we talk about Kenya and Australia, we know these are states under the Commonwealth umbrella. Apart from this body, what are the other uniting factors between Kenya and Australia?
Well, Australia and Kenya have had an enduring and maturing bilateral relationship over many decades now. We're actually both former British colonies, so we have that in common. Australia was one of the very first countries to recognise Kenya's independence because we knew as a former British colony ourselves that this was a very significant development and we wanted to be there. We've been present here in Nairobi as a High Commission since the mid-60s. We recently built a brand new High Commission up there in Roslyn, and that's a significant development for us because it reflects our commitment to doing more with Kenya going forward. We both border the Indian Ocean. We're near neighbours, so to speak.
Even though the distance is very great.
It is very great.
Yes.
But in today's modern global world, distances are diminishing.
Yes.
And aside from the Commonwealth, we have a lot in common on the international stage. We're both vibrant, modern democracies. We're committed to a global rules-based order, and we do a lot of collaboration across a whole range of multilateral international institutions. And so we see our relationship as a maturing one, and there's much more that we can do. And I want to be a part of that as Australia's representative here in Kenya.
Yes. Even before we go further, we know the late Queen Elizabeth II really strengthened the Commonwealth. And we know she passed on. Where do you think the Commonwealth is headed? Because she was very strong in terms of uniting the Commonwealth countries.
You're absolutely right. And for Australia too, we need to remember she was our Queen. King Charles III is now our King, our head of state.
Yes.
So it's important to Australia, the Commonwealth. And we've seen how the former Queen Elizabeth II actually helped bring together the many member states of the Commonwealth over a number of decades. Going forward, the Commonwealth, I envisage, will grow.
Yes.
You would have seen from the recent Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting that was held in Kigali in Rwanda that there's been an expansion of the membership of the Commonwealth. We now have Lusophone-speaking countries like Mozambique are members. We've also got former Francophone-speaking countries who are former French colonies. Rwanda is a member. We've just had Gabon and Cameroon join. So clearly there's a desire on the part of countries to become part of the Commonwealth going forward because they see it as providing a common set of interests that bring together those different countries.
What are some of these common interests that you're talking about?
So there's a deep belief in our democratic values, in rules-based global institutions. There's also, of course, a desire to be a part of the sporting common interests we all have.
Yes.
And the Commonwealth Games feature largely in that. But we're seeing that the Commonwealth is expanding its horizon.
We know that Kenya has a new government under the Kenya Kwanza. Australia equally has a relatively new government. How do you intend to cultivate a working relationship between these two governments?
So it's a golden opportunity, actually, for the bilateral relationship to develop further and for new ideas and initiatives to be discussed. I know on both the Australian side of the house and the Kenyan side of the house, There's a desire to do more with the relationship. It's a relationship which is one of those which has no irritants. We don't have arguments between ourselves. Unusually, in international relations, normally countries argue with each other, but Kenya and Australia don't. We don't seem to get irritated with each other.
Yes.
And even some of our closest neighbours, Australia and New Zealand are close, for example, but we still have arguments about can we import certain apples or things? There are arguments, but Kenya and Australia don't. I can't put my finger on it as to why, but it's a reason why we should be able to do more. And I think what we need to do is build on what are very strong people-to-people links. There's a lot of exchanges in terms of those people-to-people links that we haven't exploited enough. And I'm very excited that with the respective changes of government in Australia and Kenya, there's a desire to try and find ways in which we can build the relationship and have a closer relationship.
How do we build these relationships, for example, between government to government?
Well, I think visits are important, and it's critical that we enable ministers and parliamentarians and officials to be able to visit each other's countries. So we're very much promoting the idea of bringing more Australian politicians across here to Kenya. So that's a priority for us. We're also keen to develop formal agreements to promote trade and investment. As you know, education is a major industry in Australia. Kenya's our biggest market in sub-Saharan Africa. We're very keen to get Kenyans across to study in Australia, because also we're now seeing how a lot of Kenyans who have studied in Australia, they've returned here to Kenya. They're now ascending to more and more senior positions in government and private enterprise. And that's a reservoir of goodwill, because Kenyan, the alumni who have studied in Australia and are back here, they love Australia. They've got a lot of fond memories, and we need to build on that.
You've mentioned something on education, and you mentioned about Australia investing a lot of resources in education for Kenya. So why has Australia put so many emphasis on education for the Kenyan population?
Education is one of the biggest sectors of our economy. A lot of people think of Australia as an agricultural producing economy, a mining economy.
Yes.
But over 60% of Australia's economy is services driven, and education is central to that. And as you know, we're very reliant on international students coming to Australia and studying. And so our universities very open to as diverse source of students as possible. Right now, I can tell you, now that our borders have reopened following COVID, there's so many Australian universities now visiting Kenya. They've got agents here in Kenya. They are so keen to get Kenyans studying in Australia. And there's a real desire here as well among Kenyans by word of mouth, learning that Australia is a value for money proposition over other international
I'm very
markets.
keen on why the interest in Kenya in terms of education.
For one thing, we find that Kenyans who choose to study in Australia are model students. They study very hard, they're very committed, they are real contributors. Kenyan development, when they come back, we see they're a real commitment, and so they're, for us, very much setting the standard for how we like to see students being able to contribute.
Yes, and you think this will go further in the coming years?
Very confident.
Australia regard Kenya as a high strategic partner in the region generally.
Well, we see Kenya as being very much a hub in East Africa. It's a dynamic economy. It's influential regionally and multilaterally. I mean, Kenya's on the UN Security Council right now, and that's important to Australia. We were very keen to support Kenya in its bid to become a member of the UN Security Council, because we value Kenya's role globally. We see Kenya as a good international citizen with similar values to us. And so we're keen to ensure that everyone sees that our presence in East Africa is here through our High Commission in Nairobi, because we just understand and acknowledge that Kenya will become more and more important, and we want to be a part of that.
Bilateral relations are very, very important, and Kenya and Australia have maintained bilateral relations for almost 60 years now. What are the available opportunities for probably Kenyans in Australia and probably Australians in Kenya? What are the available investment opportunities for development?
Well, right now, if we look at investment, the investment is very ad hoc.
Yes.
There's no overall theme to it. But I do know from Australia's perspective, we're very good at mining. We have a lot of mining companies based in Western Australia on the Indian Ocean, which are actually active here in Africa more generally.
Yes.
One thing that we're keen to be able to support changes to mining laws that will encourage more investment from Australia's companies. There is, in Kenya, for example, the biggest mine by far in Kenya is an Australian mine. It's down on the south coast in Kwale.
Yes, yes.
It contributes significantly to Kenya's economy. But there are other Australian companies who very much want to be able to participate in assisting in the development of Kenya through mining activity, and would do so if we could see some more investor-encouraged changes to the mining laws. So that's something we're keen to do. We're keen to be involved in renewable energy as well.
Yes.
Kenya has a lot to offer in renewable energy. In fact, in contrast to Australia, your energy is much more based on renewable energy than is Australia.
Really?
Yes. And so, so we're keen to be involved. There's already some companies involved in the wind energy sector, solar, and there's also the geothermal sector too. So that's something we're keen to engage in. We're also wanting Kenyans to see Australia as an investment opportunity. And Kenya does wonderfully well in financial services technology, for example. We have a lot to learn from you in that respect. So we would love to see those sorts of entrepreneurs looking at Australia for further investment opportunities.
You've talked about Australians, especially investing in Kenya. For example, in mining, you mentioned Kwale.
Yes.
What about Kenyans in terms of investing in Australia? Because we also know that there are Kenyans that are able to invest outside of Kenya, and Australia is one of the countries.
Yes. Well, that's where I think that financial services technology is important.
Like M-Pesa? Do you mean
yes,
that?
Absolutely.
Yes.
We don't have that in Australia. So that's something that we could learn from, most definitely. But also I see there's a considerable expertise here in Kenya in the health sector, especially around nursing, where Australia is very reliant on nurses from Kenya. And so there's a lot more cooperation, investment that could happen in that space. We also think that with your flower industry,
yes,
that there are opportunities further to progress and
because
expand
now that the flower is especially going to Europe
but also Australia. We import flowers from Kenya as well. Not many people realise that, but there's a growing market for that. But I just think too, more broadly, that Kenya has so many innovators across so many sectors. And I understand why you look to the immediate region and why there's the commitment in Africa. But looking east across the Indian Ocean would also provide, I think, some opportunities, and Australia would very much welcome that.
Let me talk about an issue that is very important to this country, or very significant. Like now we are facing a serious drought in this country. These are issues to do with climate change. What is Australia doing in terms of ensuring that issues of climate change are taken care of, especially because, the developed nations have been very difficult in terms of signing agreements to curb climate change. What is Australia doing in terms of ensuring that climate change agreements are signed and are taken care of?
Well, I'll be very honest with you. In recent years, there's been criticism of Australia for its policies around climate change, in particular the targets that have been set for reducing emissions. Australia has been a country which has been heavily reliant on coal as a major source of its power. There had been a certain amount of controversy around how quickly we should phase out those coal-fired power generating plants. The recent election, one of the reasons why there was a change of government is because climate change featured very prominently in that election campaign, and the incoming new government had made very clear that it wanted to change our policies around climate change. And so almost immediately upon getting into power, that government introduced legislation to put in place mandatory targets to demonstrate that Australia was going to be more active in seeking to model itself as a good citizen in reducing as quickly as possible our own emissions. So that's been an important development in recent months.
Yes.
There has been a change in Australia's policy, and a significant change.
The policy is to slash the carbon emissions by 43%.
Yes.
So, and the target is net zero by 2050.
Correct.
Is that achievable?
Yes, it is.
Considering that also depend on industries, you're in an industrialized country generally.
Yes.
Yes. Is it possible?
But what's happening too is that there has been a sea change in our energy market. The development of what we call competitively priced renewable energy sources has grown much more quickly than had been anticipated 10 or more years ago. We're rapidly moving towards having some of our states wholly reliant on renewable energy. So we have lots of sun, lots of wind. Even right now, most people wouldn't realise Australia is the biggest taker-upper of solar panels on household roofs. So we've very quickly moved to a situation in which solar panels on household roofs has become the norm.
It is a feature now.
It's yeah, right now, so those coal-fired power plants are being phased out more quickly than had been anticipated.
That was my next question, because Australia seems to be depending on coal a lot, and we know coal is very dangerous to
yes,
the environment.
It was. But there's even some of the big companies have just made some decisions recently that they're going to bring forward their decommissioning timelines for those big coal-fired power plants.
Thank you very much, Luke Williams. Thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Luke Williams is the Australian High Commissioner to Kenya, and he says Kenya and Australia have been great bilateral partners for long, and his country intends to continue the collaboration with Kenya Kwanza government. And with that, we have come to the end of the Diplomat program. It was a pleasure having you. My name is Geoffrey Onditi.